Dad pulls out gun on doctor to save son, then something unbelievable happens. George Pickering wasn't ready to accept the brutal and nasty truth and was completely traumatized. In a deranged state, he took his pistol, rushed into the hospital, and pointed at the doctor. Police were called, and then suddenly, everyone's eyes widened in surprise when something unexpected happens. No parents would want their children to lose their life before them, but no one can change God's will, or maybe they can? It is said that faith can move mountains, and this father proved it right, not by praying, but by threatening the doctors. The story began in 2015 when a 27-year-old man suffered a stroke and was immediately rushed to the hospital. George Pickering was put on life support and the doctors tried every possible thing to save the patient. Unfortunately, they soon lost hope and recommended the family members to pull the plug. The news absolutely shattered the parents, but it was the father, George Pickering too, who couldn't handle the truth. Doctors had ordered a terminal wean, where life support is slowly withdrawn, after George's brain supposedly stopped functioning following a stroke in January. In the absence of the father, the medical professional asked the mother and the brother of the patient to think about it. Both took the toughest decision of their lives and told the doctor that they should go ahead and remove George from life support. After getting the family's consent, the hospital staff registered the patient for organ donation. Little did they know that a drama was about to unfold that was no less than an action scene from the movie. George Pickering too came back to the hospital after crying his heart out, but then another appalling news made him furious. The man couldn't believe that his wife and another son agreed with the doctor to pull George from life support. The father was just not ready to accept the fact that there was no hope for his son and it was time to tell him goodbye forever. George Pickering too thought that the doctor needs to give the patient more time and the last chance before taking such a drastic step. But his wife and the second son tried to make him understand that they had spoken to the doctors and there was just no reason to delay this process. The man again stormed out of the hospital room and demanded the doctors to keep his son on life support just a little bit longer. However, the doctors refused and informed him that he was jeopardizing the people that need his organs. George too was so distraught that he went straight to the room and held his son's hand and just stared at him. He was praying that George would give him some sign and show everyone that he was not lifeless and there was hope for his recovery. Soon, the doctor and nurses began filtering into the room to begin the procedure of removing the patient from life support. The father ran out of the hospital toward his car to get his 9mm handgun and rushed back to his son's room. Everybody stared in disbelief when he pointed the weapon at the doctor and ordered them to stop whatever they were doing. The doctor and the nurses obeyed. Thankfully, they had not yet removed George from life support. The medical professionals were asked to leave the room, after which the father locked the room. For the next several hours, George Pickering too kept his gun aimed at the door as he laid over his son and just kept looking down in hopes that his son would give him some sign. The SWAT team arrived at the hospital and stood near the room, and told the armed man to let them in. Meanwhile, the father kept looking at his son and praying desperately that George would show some kind of sign. The moment the SWAT team kicked the door, the father squeezed his hand, and a miracle took place. The son squeezed his father's hand in response, and that's when the man dropped his gun and surrendered. He kept yelling for the doctors to come in and when they did, they saw the patient was moving his hand and his eyes were open. It was a miraculous moment. Everybody was amazed and surprised that a man who was pronounced deceased just woke up. The incident landed Pickering behind bars on 2 counts of aggravated physical harm with a fatal weapon. George was recovering well and his father was released with 1 charge dismissed and the other reduced. In an interview, he said, "I knew if I had 3 or 4 hours that night I would know whether George was alive or not. During that 3 hours, George squeezed my hand 3 or 4 times on command. Pickering recounted that his son had had seizures in the past, so he knew the procedure. He also knew that, contrary to what the hospital told him in January, his son's brain hadn't stopped working. The younger Pickering, his father's spitting image, was moved after learning about what took place. There was a law broken, but it was broken for all the right reasons. I'm here now because of it. It was love, the son said.